So I'm going to show you two things. The first one, can you see the website of Voces y Caras? Okay, so the first was the website and the description of the project. This is where we have all the interviews by years. So we started in 2012, now we're in 2020. And when you enter each of the years, you will find the people that we have interviewed. You can actually listen to the interview by pressing here, and you can view a poster that is a bilingual poster that will give you a snippet, like a little bit of what is this interview about. Then the other thing I wanted to show you is the page of collaborators, which I think is one of the most important pages that I have here. And it is the name of all the students that have participated in my project since 2012. And the list is getting bigger and bigger. And I think that's why I find this extremely important. So that's basically the technology that I use. And we're always trying to find out more. You know, in the future, I would like to have more of a podcast type of interviews, or maybe if we can start adding videos, that would be fantastic. But then again, that is all depending on that funding that I'm asking for.
So the Eartha project and the Viola Muse project are built on they're built in very similar fashions. So they both use Omeka as a front end. I'll share my screen. Omeka is it's a pretty common platform these days for creating websites that are based off of collections of material that can be textual material or visual material. Especially well, among digital humanities folks and librarians, it's a pretty well-known, it's an open source platform. You can download it and run it yourself, or you can use, you can host your site on Omeka itself has a hosting platform that you can use. This is the Eartha White site. Again, this is the site that my student built, Lynn built this. And Omeka is built around the concept of individual items. So you put the documents on here as each one is a separate item, and then you can build exhibits, as I mentioned, that tie those together. So this is the first exhibit that Lynn built, and you can navigate to the different sections over here on the right. The Viola Muse site, it looks similar because it's the same. We're using the same theme. We're gonna work on the visual aspects of this more, so that eventually they won't look so much alike. But it's the same concept. You can navigate the items by title. We also have brought you can always navigate by tags, but we brought it kind of to we've put an entry in 4 tags into the navigation here, because I think it's interesting, the things that start to stand out when you look at the items this way. And then you can organize items into collections. And for this project, we have structured the collections according to the physical organization of the archive. So it's organized into folders, physical manila folders. So for the contents of each folder, we've created a collection here on the website. For the files themselves, the actual editions, we're using 2 technologies. We're using TEI-XML, which is the standard for textual encoding in the humanities internationally. It's pretty much the thing that you use unless you have a really good reason not to, I guess. And so when you look at the Omeka item for each document, you scroll down and you can come to a little iframe, a little window where you can see our edition, or you can click to open it in a separate browser window. And I can show you later what the TEI-XML looks like if you want to see it behind the scenes. But this is what it looks like on the website itself. It's displayed using a tool called TEI Boilerplate, which is a lightweight platform for displaying TEI encoded files that was developed at the Indiana University by John Walsh and a team there about 10 years ago. The idea behind it is that you can set it up and you can customize it without having to have too much technical knowledge. So it's a good starting point, and then you customize it. And for both projects, we've done some customization. We've created our approach to editing involves transcribing the text as we see it. So there's a transcription view that we try to render what's on the page. And then we have actually an intermediate view that shows you the editorial changes that have been made. And then a reading text, which is a modernized version. And we have a couple features in here. You can hide the page images if you want. And for the documents that have notes, you can hide the notes. This is an example of a document on the Viola Muse site. This is one that we've done quite a bit of work on. It's her notes from an interview with a gentleman named Charles Coates. He was 108 years old when she did this interview. And because we're doing more annotation on these documents, we've created a system up here for, we have the same reading views. Also, we've added one here for, if you want to see the semantic markup that we've done of names of people and places and dates, you can see that this is the encoding that we use to build those tags on Omeka. But we have the same transcription view, that intermediate view, and then the reading view. And we've made a way that you can hide all of the notes, or you can hide them by category. So if you only want to see, let's say, the historical notes, we've set it up so that you could just see those on the assumption that different readers are going to have different interests when they come to these. And if all of the notes are, you can either see them all or see none of them. It might be too much. So we're trying to make a sort of more granular way to approach the notes. The other main customization, as we mentioned, is that we're doing some mapping for the Viola Muse project. And so we've created this place index, which is, it's an index of all of the place names that are mentioned in the documents. And for each one, we list the documents where they're mentioned. And then for the ones that we've mapped already, we have links to maps. And I'll show you what a couple of those look like. This is Stanton School, which it's very well-known high school in Jacksonville. It's now located on 13th Street, but originally it was downtown, and it was really important part of the African-American community here. James Weldon Johnson was principal there. Eartha White was a student and a teacher there. And so we're building this map viewer that allows you to see these places on historical maps. And then also on this same page, we're providing an annotation about the places, and then down below a modern GIS, we're using Google Maps for this, that shows you what that place looks like now. That's one example. Another would be, this is the Masonic Temple. It's referred to in the documents as the Colored Masonic Temple. It was built by the African-American community, entirely owned by the African-American community. This is a map from 1949. It's from a series of maps that this company, the Sanborn Fire Insurance and Map Company made. They're maps that were to be used by insurance assessors to write fire insurance policies. But they're really good maps of metropolitan areas in the US, and there are several of Jacksonville. And so we've provided a way here to highlight, you can't quite see it terribly well yet, on the map, the Masonic Temple, and then down below you can see, this is one of actually Stanton is still there. This is the Stanton building, and this is the Masonic Temple. They're still there, kind of providing testimony to this world that was, because all of the rest of this, if you look up above and you see these very dense city blocks with homes and stores and schools and churches, and then you compare it to this, you can see what we were referring to before about just kind of the destruction of this part of town, largely because of the interstate, which you can see as True pointed out, goes right through the heart of La Villa, this area. And so those are the main things we're using for these two projects. Omeka as a front end, TEI XML as an encoding standard, and then TEI boilerplate to display the files. And then this map viewer is kind of an extension of TEI boilerplate.
Thank you. So how is the workflow for the projects? I'm assuming it looks a little different depending on how much student involvement and your own tasks at hand. So I'm not sure who wants to start, but if you discuss the workflow, that'd be great.
Okay, we'll continue, I guess, in the same order. I'm busy with Voces y Caras the whole year. And it is something that I do in the springtime with the students, and I have to prepare them for the interviews. And then once they have the interviews, I have to listen to the interview first because I have to help them edit. Then I have to listen again to every interview at the end so I can give them a grade. And then I take a little break. And then over the summer and closer to the beginning of the fall, I start listening and preparing all the materials, putting them up in on the website. And I work with Mike Boyles to do the presentation in the library. And if I'm working with an intern, then that semester I'm also working around Voces y Caras, because usually the interns will be working with captions. So that's when we have to partner up and listen again and make sure that the captions are saying exactly, you know, what the people are trying to say. So it's basically a lot of the year goes into it. It's time consuming. But it's also, and then another part that is really time consuming is social media. That for me, it's really difficult to do. And that's why having an intern really helps, because you know, you have to post things on Instagram and Facebook and try to follow up and try to keep the stories going. And I'm good at putting them up as, you know, when they first come out, but the hard part is to follow up, to do the weekly things that is so much easier for younger people. But yeah.
So for the Eartha White project, the workflow is really based around individual documents. Either the student picks one, or we give them one to work on. They transcribe it, they encode it in TI-XML. In some cases, they do some preliminary annotation. Me or the student leader does a first round of editorial review of that. We publish it online, and we create the item on Omeka, and then ideally, there's a final round of editorial review. I think what might be interesting right now is that hasn't happened. For what you see on the Eartha White website right now is really student work, because I haven't had a chance to go back and review a lot of it. But eventually that will happen. It's sort of a publish as you go model. We've never sort of had an official launch of the site, or I guess it's a constantly evolving work in progress, with the understanding that things aren't going to be perfect, but that we make them available as soon as we can. For the Muse project, it's a bit more involved. So I think that sort of document based model of workflow applies, but I think Drew and Laura can probably speak more to the larger workflow, because it's a much more involved project.
I thought I would just copy into the chat our like the sections of our Teams site. We have a Microsoft Teams site, which we looked around at a couple of different platforms for organizing group projects like this, and Teams is supported by our university. Seemed like the best option, both for kind of communication among us that we wanted to hang on to, so it like archives chat, and then you know, we have different sort of sections of the Teams site where we file protocol related to these particular aspects of the workflow. We communicate with each other, we store notes, and so on, and it's easy to get students enrolled in the Teams site. So these are the sections of the Teams site. So first, obviously for us, was grant applications. We had to apply for this grant before the project began, but that's an ongoing part of it. And then you can kind of go down from there. Document scanning, we can talk about our scanners in the next question, but transcription and proofing, secondary research, community outreach, editorial apparatus. So head notes for the documents, and editor's introduction, you know, that kind of annotation. And then the publishing, that should be Omeka site. I think it got spell corrected. And then dissemination, so all of these parts except are pretty much always ongoing. So they're a little bit, it's a little bit workflow, but it's also a lot of these balls are in the air kind of all the time. And we have regular meetings and like monthly to-do lists, basically.
So I mean, this list is probably leading into where I'm going next, which is kind of the first steps to get started or first considerations if you're going to start a project like that. So what is kind of your advice on the first steps that people would take to create similar projects or digital humanities projects in general? Like, should we start with grants or should we start with just kind of like getting like a little bit first and then looking into grants?
You should start by having colleagues who've already done really successful versions of your same project so that you can build on. I mean, that's a joke, but it's not a joke at all. Like, this is, it gets easier. The kinds of projects that we're doing with the Viola Muse thing is 10 times easier because Clayton had already begun working on the Eartha White, and we're building on the infrastructure from that project, the knowledge gained, the students who've learned, so maybe Clayton and Constanza could talk more about getting started, since I feel like Drew and I are sort of riding the coattails a little bit.
Okay, so for me, since I started before the DHI existed, I really had no idea what I was doing. So I think that the first thing I can say is you need to figure out what you want to highlight, what are your goals, who are the people that you're going to be working with, and is it sustainable? And I think sustainability is key for a project because there's so many projects that you start and then you don't see anything else happening with them. And it's because it's time consuming. And so for me, sustainability came with the students. Every year I get new students. Every year I get them super excited about this. By now, everybody knows my project, so I don't even have to recruit students. They come to me and they say, I really want to be part of this project. And I think they realize also that this project is something they can take with them after they graduate. They can put it in their resumes. They can talk about it in job interviews. If they interview someone that they care about, this is something that stays there as part of the history of Jacksonville, the history that they are building. So I think that is the thing for me, is that sustainability through people and through people who want to be part of it.
So I would say a few good starting points are probably building those partnerships that we talked about, because I think that, like Constanza said, you need to figure out what you want to work with, but I think also who you're going to work with in doing it. So partnerships with other faculty, with archives, with other stakeholders in the projects. And then I think also, at least for the projects we're talking about today, I think finding a pedagogical context in which the project can evolve is really useful, because if you can incorporate it into your teaching, that sort of, I think it lends sustainability to it in a way. I mean, Constanza's project is the perfect example of that. Every spring she teaches this course and the students in the course contribute to the project. And it's just like, it doesn't fail. Like it's always going to work. And the Eartha White project doesn't have that sort of consistent, it doesn't have a built-in course every year, but if it did, I think that would be, I think that's something to really aim for. Then the other thing I think is, you have to figure out what technologies you're going to use and have some familiarity with that. But the caveat I would say is, at least for digital editing, you don't have to know a ton to get involved. I think that the TEI, again, that's the kind of the standard, but it's not hard to learn. XML is not a programming language. It's a markup language. So you're not writing code. You're just describing things. You're labeling things essentially. And the TEI is not just a standard, it's also a community. And the TEI community is super excited for you to start using the TEI. And so there are lots of ways that you can learn about it. There are courses, there's online tutorials. They have a listserv that you can post any kind of question and you'll get tons of answers right away. So it's a really supportive international community of people who use the TEI and they think about it critically. And so it's a nice community to be involved in. And Omeka is not hard to use. I think it's very, very accessible. I've used it with students and I've given them very little instruction and they just go in and figure it out. It's very intuitive. You don't have to use TEI boilerplate. It's not hard to customize, but you don't have to use it at all. There's a project called the Topless Project, which is run by the TEI consortium, and they'll host you can publish your TEI files on their site. You can basically build your TEI-based project on their site. It's free. So I think there are ways to get, I'm speaking specifically to digital editing, but I think there are ways to get involved with it without having to know a whole bunch. And if you don't have to know a whole bunch, your students don't have to know a whole bunch. I think that the barriers to teaching it are also pretty low. And then the other thing I would say is you want to build a prototype. You kind of want to walk through the workflow of what you want to do, whether that's with students or in some other way, before you do it with them, and then test it out to make sure it works, and then document those procedures. I think it's a lot easier to work with students or just in general to work on your own if you have sort of thought it through and documented what you're doing. And then I think another way to get started, in addition to those things, is to write about what you're doing or what you want to do or what you hope to do. It seems like that's an unusual kind of scholarship to sort of write speculative work, but actually within the DH world, that's okay. I think it's pretty accepted to, it's pretty acceptable to sort of theorize a project before you even start work on it. And so I think that also is, it's a way to sort of work on your project theoretically before you get too far into it. And also those are things that you can publish. And so if you're concerned about, if you're in a job where you're concerned about promotion and tenure and promotion, and you need to have some sort of things, your digital project, you're not sure if it will count, your articles will. And so I think that starting off by thinking about, from the very beginning, sort of reflecting on, not just doing the work, but reflecting on it from the start might be a good starting point in some cases.
Yeah. What considerations with respect to the project management would you, if that the leaders of those projects should be aware of? So if I was going to start it, like, what should I keep in mind as I'm leading a team to create these projects?
I think that you need to be aware that you're going to fail at doing a lot of things, and then you learn and you do it again, and that not everything has to be perfect, especially if you're working with students, because it's all a learning curve, right? And the work is not perfect, and that's okay. I think you need to be aware that it's time consuming because you want to dedicate a lot of time to I listen to interviews so much that if you ask me about any interviewee from 2013, we can have a conversation about it. I know every single one of those interviews, and I talk about them in class. And when I'm teaching, I'm saying, no, in 2012 or the first year, I don't remember the year that well, but we interviewed this person who is from this place, and this is what happened to this person. I found it so interesting. You get to know your project really, really well throughout the years. I think that you need to keep in mind that you need to spend time making things accessible to others. And that is something that we need to strive for. We need to be able to if we want to reach all kinds of publics, then we need to have that accessibility. And then the other thing that I will find again, and I mentioned it before, is what is your presence on social media if you really want to make this project known.
Laura, you're probably the best one to speak to this.
Yeah, I was trying to think. True and I kind of together walked through some of the PR aspects of this project. The university public relations office actually issued a press release because we'd gotten an NEH grant, so we got some press coverage on this on the project. And I think, you know, I don't know, True, how you felt about all of that. I think the thing to know about when you're interacting with like sort of the local news is that they're going to edit it like crazy. And then, and I think for me, I was very nervous and anxious about how to talk about the historical importance of this material in a way that wasn't condescending towards the community that, you know, had actual ties and still has ties to this woman. At one point we had talked about the fact that like we didn't have photographs of her. And we were very clear that we knew that that didn't mean those photographs didn't exist, you know. But there is this way in which like this sort of story gets necessarily sensationalized, and like I was concerned about that, like sort of how to work on this material, talk about it in public in a way that didn't replicate some of the bad sort of historical relationships between the university and these communities, and sort of, you know, how to talk about it in a way that wasn't like, you know, we have found this lost history, you know, or some of these tropes that I think can be pretty offensive to people who, you know, for them, this history hasn't been lost, right? It's like sort of part of their everyday life. So it's, and I think that's a delicate kind of line to walk while still trying to kind of get the word out that you're working on this material and you actually do want people to call you with the information that they have, and so on. So that was the thing that kind of most immediately came to my mind, and that we didn't get any, there's no like university training on how to do this sort of the right way. And indeed, we're kind of lucky we got any coverage at all. And in fact, the PR office, the day that they kind of came to set up these interviews with us, they were like, oh yeah, we usually don't cover stuff like this. They had just come from the physics department where they were doing their Exploding Pumpkins event during around Halloween, and the PR woman was like, that's the kind of thing, you know, that really gets press coverage, is the Exploding Pumpkins event, like a big sort of messy, disgusting event with students, you know, that is visually stimulating. So that was like kind of our fall experience, I think, doing the rounds a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're talking about that, Laura. I think that's probably a huge consideration that we always need to keep in mind, that we are partnering, and we you know, there's that sense of kind of academic removal that I think we actively try and work past when we're doing work with communities, because that's respectful. Right? This is a partnership. There's knowledge there that we don't have. There's, you know, it's a kind of a reciprocal relationship in that way. And I think that's important to keep in mind, that we're talking with the community. We're not talking at them. We have a lot to learn from the people who've been in touch with us. So I think, you know, thinking about the work as a partnership among communities, and also keeping in mind the audience, that, you know, we're not, at least the way I think about it, I'm not talking solely to other academics. I want this to be a conversation that happens, and I want the things that we talk about and that we do to be respectful. I think I just keep coming back to that, and aware, you know, and so Constanza did talk about that idea of accessibility as well. So making sure that we are, you know, remembering the communities that we're engaging with, and that we are also parts of those communities as well. We're not separate from, or certainly not above. And so, you know, in terms of what Constanza had said earlier as well, in addition to being accessible, I think it's important to continually talk about the meaningfulness of the projects and the relevance of the projects, especially ones like ours that deal so much with the past and with history, to talk about why that's contemporarily relevant and important, and the parallels that are still with us to those times. And also keep it engaging. You know, I'm so grateful for the work Clayton has done in terms of the mapping. because I think that visual aspect of the Viola Muse project is hugely important and hugely engaging, and we can represent in that way some of the changes that have happened in the city, that we wouldn't have that really concrete way of conceptualizing without those maps. And then just to get back to that original question, the first thing that comes to mind, what do you need, you know, for project management? You need a Laura. Laura is incredibly organized, and I'm so glad that you put the teams sections up there, because I think you have that kind of mind that thinks about all of these pieces and helps us keep track of them. So yeah, a mind like that, organized mind that Laura has, and you know, just the great ideas and technical awareness that Clayton has. I'm really grateful for this work with these partners.
Great, thank you. Do you have any advice on other resources? Clayton, I know that you've already shared the Google Doc. Is there anything you want to highlight, or areas that people should look into, advice on grants that you guys think is important for us to know?
So I put onto that list a few, if you're interested in getting involved in digital editing, I put on there some of the organizations that you might want to connect with. I mentioned the TEI. You can join the TEI. You don't have to join. You can just get on their listserv. Their guidelines are online. That's one of the best resources. If you're curious about what I'm talking about when I talk about the TEI, just take a look at the guidelines. It's organized by topics. So basically the chapters in that guide are organized around the types of things you might be working with. So the manuscripts, print texts, and that's broken down by genre. So, you know, there are resources for marking up poetry or dramatic works, things like that. I put a link here to the Oxygen XML editor's website. It's the kind of the standard tool that people use when they have access to it. You can get an academic license for $99, so it's not really out of reach. But if you're going to use it with students, you need to have a site license, and so that's something you need institutional support for. But there are other options. This Visual Studio Code is absolutely free, and it's a full-featured editor, just like Oxygen. The Omeka site I put here, and also omeka.net, which is the hosting platform for Omeka. The link to TEI boilerplate is here, and then the Topless project that I mentioned that you can use to host your XML files and basically build your project online. The TEI Consortium's website is here. So I mentioned all that. Something else that I would point to is the Association for Documentary Editing. They're the main organization for this type of work, working with archival documents, I guess, as opposed to literary editing. The ADE focuses more on working with historical documents, one-of-a-kind archival materials. The National Council on Public History is an organization that is not focused on digital editing in any way, but they're focused on public history. And I think that it's a relevant place to go if you want to think about this kind of work. I've presented there a couple of times. We're actually, Laura True and I and a couple of students are presenting there this spring. Scholarly editing is an annual that the Association for Documentary Editing publishes, and they publish what they call micro editions or small scale digital editions. And so this is a really good way. This is actually how I did my first digital edition. They put out a call each year saying, submit your idea for doing an experimental edition with us. And if you have an idea, you can send it to them. And if they accept it, they kind of coach you through building a digital edition. So they tell you what you need to do, and they get you started, and then they help you put it online. And if it goes through their peer review, it gets published as part of their journal. So it's a good way to learn how to do it. And it's also a good way to have an edition that's peer reviewed, because that is hard to come by. And that, again, if you're concerned about tenure and promotion, that's the kind of edition you want to have. That's the kind of digital edition you want to have. I also put the link here to the Digital Humanities Institute at UNF. We've mentioned it several times. Also the catalog description to that course that I mentioned. I would say also, if you're on this and you're interested in these things and you want to get started with digital editing, you can write to me and I can kind of point you in the right direction also.
Amazing compilation of resources right there. And I already know what I'm going to go look at after we're done on our talk. Anybody else want to share any advice you have on resources or getting started? Or shall we open it up to Q&A? Good. So audience, any questions for our panel?
There's one in the chat.
Yeah, hey, this is Brian. Hey, so I just posted it there because I wasn't sure when we were going to open up, but Constanza, this is for you. Actually, it looks like we were at the Graduate Center at the same time, oddly enough. I think you were at CUNY, is that right? Oh, I think you're on mute, but yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
I was.
Yeah, so, well, yeah, I was just curious. I've done oral history projects over the years in my just intro history classes. And one thing I have struggled with always is identifying people to interview. So I'm curious how you do that. And then the other thing is, how do you deal with the problem of having a recorded document now that might reveal information about an interviewee that is dangerous for that person?
Yes. Okay, so we identify interviewees through contacts and through the students. The students usually tell me, oh, my teacher in high school was really nice. I really would like to interview him or her, or my doctor is from Colombia and I would like to interview this person because he was so kind. Or, I'm really interested. I love this restaurant, and is it okay if I interview the owner of this restaurant? So we usually try to do that. And there is no end of people that we can interview, to be honest. Every semester I feel like, oh, and we couldn't interview this person. We didn't have enough person, but then I try the following year. Sometimes people that know about my project write to me and say, hey, I know somebody that maybe one of your students can interview. And then about the interviews with undocumented people, we have had a few of those. And one of the things that I want to show you, I'm trying to look on my website because I want to show you an image that we find. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So I had a student in the arts department, and he was working with printmaking, and he made this painting for me, and it says illegal. And then obviously he's covering his mouth, and the whole idea behind it is, yes, you cannot speak, but you do have a voice. So then we don't put the image of the person, we do not say the name, and the interview with people are called anonimo or anonima, for an anonymous person, obviously. And we do not reveal anything personal in the interview. So we're making sure that when they speak, they don't say any names. Or if they want to say a name, they just use a different name. Yeah.
Okay,
So
great. Yeah, see, I mean, that was kind of my hunch about what would be the appropriate thing to do. But, there's this challenge because, when you read, kind of theory about oral history, there's a lot of talk about, wanting to identify, the source, right? Who is the source? And, I think for historians, it's really uncomfortable to have an anonymous source, So, but, ethically, obviously, I mean, you're not, the thing to do would appear to be to leave them as anonymous, right? But I think you still, for a historian, you still have very useful information, even if you can't identify that subject.
It's just that it's part of the community, and if we're going to do, if we're going to talk about immigrants, we need to talk about immigrants that are undocumented, right? And they are anonymous for many, many of us, and for many, many reasons. So that is just part of how it is, dealing with communities that we need, and that somehow we don't want to deal with, right? So, yeah. Another thing that we do with people is that we're very clear. We have to, we send them with a paper. My students always go with a paper in which they explain what is the project, what we're going to use it for. We're not comparing or studying situations or immigration status. We just want your story, right? And I think that people want to give you your story because a lot of them want to heal from a lot of trauma, and they want to talk, and they want to say, and they want others to know what is it that they went through. Others, they feel really proud of overcoming all of this, even if they're undocumented, and giving a better future to their families. And they feel that that is something that although they cannot identify themselves as people, they think that their story has worth.
We have any other questions from the audience?
Can I chime in one more time?
Yes.
All right. So actually, I have a question for Clayton about mapping. I, over the years, was trying to get my students to do some kind of mapping of sort of changing patterns of segregation in Fort Pierce. And we were using like the business directories and the kind of white pages locally. And it was like really interesting, and we found some fascinating things. But the challenge I kept coming back to was like, how do I make this sustainable? I found that I was doing so much of the work, and I was having a hard time connecting what we were doing with the students. And I mean, our challenge at like the community college level is, how do you integrate these projects into like intro classes where you're only going to see the students maybe one semester? And I'm just curious if with mapping in particular, have you come up with any ways to make this manageable, I guess, for these types of classes? Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I have to start off by saying I'm completely unqualified to talk about mapping. I do know, I understand what you're talking about. I haven't done mapping with students beyond having a couple of students work with story maps. And I know about that because we have a colleague at UNF who teaches GIS, and he works with ArcGIS story maps. He's taught us a couple of workshops on how to use it. And that strikes me as a platform that students can work in, and it's pretty straightforward. Whether those projects become things that are sustainable beyond the end of the semester, I don't know. I think you're right that it would have to be something that the faculty person is pretty involved in and has an ongoing commitment. And if you have 30 of those each year, it's going to be really hard to do that. I will say, so I have no background in GIS. The mapping that we're doing for this project, I started off by thinking, looking at projects that layer historical maps over, that use historical maps as layers in something like Google Maps. And there are a lot of really interesting projects that are like that, where you can sort of show different layers and compare the past to the present. The problem that I, not knowing anything about this stuff, immediately ran into is that the historical maps don't line up. So you could overlay the map that I showed you from 1876 over Google Map, but it would be pretty meaningless because they just, spatially they're not the same. So that was one reason that I was interested in sort of doing the two things separately. But the other thing, I think this speaks to sustainability, is that we would like this project to go up online and to be there for a long time. And I'm concerned that if we build the mapping in a proprietary program. We're using Google Maps for the GIS-based part of it, but the rest of it it's just JavaScript that I've written. That we've got XML files with the map data, and we query those files for the information, and we display it. And my hope is that once that's built and it's debugged, it'll work for a long time, because nothing's going to change. The data that we're feeding into Google Maps is also, we're treating it in the same way. So I'm not going in and building a map in Google. We're just passing the information to it. Every time somebody loads that map page, it's using the Google Maps API to push the information into Google. So if we decided to stop using Google at some point, we could push that information into another platform. So we're dependent on Google, but only for as long as we're using it. And then we don't have to do a major rework of the mapping functionality if we were to switch to a different platform for that. I don't know if I think you were asking more about students, and I talk more about sort of sustainability in general, but that's what I can tell you with the limited knowledge that I have. No,
thank you very much. I think my question got a little confused as I had a screaming 3-year-old here and distracted me. But yeah, no, that is useful for me. But certainly, I think part of the problem is that we were at different institutions, right? And our institution is so focused on these, students that we see in these intro level classes. We see them for a short period of time, and sometimes their skills are they're not. I mean, I don't mean to speak poorly of my students, but I mean, sometimes they have some very basic skills that they need to kind of get a handle of first. And so kind of to plop mapping, on top of all of that sometimes gets a little overwhelming. So, but yeah, I think my suspicion is that this is something that not many people have resolved. Maybe there may not be a model really at this point that is, easily replicatable for this, but yeah.
Thank you, Brian. That was great. Costanza, Mia has a question in the chat. What program did you use to create the summaries of the interviews? She thinks they look great.
Yeah, I answered there. We use InDesign, Adobe InDesign. And of course, with my graphic designer partner, he just makes everything look amazing.
Sounds good. We have the Adobe suite at IRSC, and so I'm always trying to figure out ways to have students create interesting documents. So that might be a good place to start.
Oh yeah, InDesign has all kinds of really nice features.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions? I have one actually before we go. When you were talking about the mapping, I couldn't help but think of, we have the Zora Neale Hurston Trail near us, and we've talked in the past about maybe doing, like at the different sites, kind of a virtual tour in a way. Have you guys done any, kind of on the ground tour with these sites that you've been researching and documenting? Or any idea of maybe like a virtual tour at some point of these sites? Or I know it's problematic because you said a lot of the spaces are just not there anymore. So that probably presents a challenge. But I just wanted to see if you had had any experience with the idea of a tour with it.
We haven't gotten that far yet, but it has occurred to us. I mean, it jumps out that it could be done, and particularly now that we're not just using the historical map, but we have the data in Google Maps. So it'd be really, I don't know how to do it, but I don't think it would be complicated to set that up. I know that True has done a similar tour, not based on the information in these documents, but maybe you could mention that, True, because that's the type of on-the-ground experience.
It's definitely something doable and would be an exciting thing to do. And the tour that I did, I don't lead it. It's led by a man here who's a writer for an online magazine called The Jackson, which researches a lot and disseminates a lot of information about Jacksonville's history. But he's also an architect and an urban planner. And he's got a wealth of knowledge about the La Villa area and downtown. And so one year, I guess it was the first fall of COVID, one of my classes, we did a socially distanced bike tour of the area that he led, and it was really illuminating for me for certain, and for the students as well. So I know that that's something that would be really exciting to do as a follow-up project, or later on for the sites that are mentioned in the Viola Muse papers.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I think we're getting toward the end. So any final words, comments before we wrap up?
Just want to encourage everybody to use our contact info, and we're happy to chat more about any of these things, including grant applications and things like that. So thanks so much for having us.
Oh, thank you all so much for agreeing to speak with us today. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been really nice.
Thank you.
I'll say that the questions were so well presented and so comprehensive that that's probably part of why we didn't have a ton of questions. we were able to cover a lot in the information,
Yes, you guys planned well. Obviously I'm taking this all from what Clayton had given me. So that was fabulous. Thank you. But yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, I don't know if there's really a whole lot of questions because yeah, like you said, it's very comprehensive what you.
It worked really well. So
yes.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Tia. It was a really good opportunity.
yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, nice to meet you on Zoom, Michelle.
Yes. Yes.
Everyone enjoy the weekend.
Are you
Okay.
going to be at FLDH, Michelle?
I am. Yes. So
Oh,
I'm
great.
on the conference planning committee. So
Okay.
haven't
know
reserved a room yet, but planning to be there for a couple of days at least. I know our conference is only one day, but you need to take advantage of St. Augustine when you can, right?
Great. Well, we'll see you then.
We'll
Yes.
see you there then.
See
And
you guys.
congratulations again, Mia.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so excited. There's actually some really cool projects. I just got an email from UNC about they want to do a project in different states about Jim Crow laws. And so I'm going to bring that to the FLDH Executive Council meeting because I think that could be something that could really get FLDH to the next level.
That's great.
Cool. Fantastic. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're good?
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah.
Truly.
That was good. It went like almost too smoothly in a way. Okay.
Stop recording.